most forms of motorsport, increasing the track or the width of the wheelbase is a desirable thing because it gives you better handling. But with Motorcars or Autotests, things are a little different. The majority of Motorcar tests usually contain some slaloming, where you've got 3 flags in a row and you've got to go left, right. And it's very easy when you're doing that slaloming to get your front wheel past the flag, and then as you're turning to go to the other one, your back wheel flips the flag as you go through. So what I'm going to do, and I did this on my previous Motorcar Special, is I'm actually going to narrow the track and bring it in as much as I can without being stupid, so that once the front wheels are past the flag in the slalom, I don't have to worry about the back because they're closer in. The way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to cut this Corolla rear suspension crossmember. I'm going to take out, looking at this, I can take out about 150 mil, which will bring each rear wheel in 75 mil. To do it, I just need to undo these 2 long bolts that hold the rear lower suspension control arms on, get rid of the suspension hubs and everything, and then I'll be able to cut this, take that middle piece out, weld it back together and put some strengthening plates on it. Another advantage in this particular case of decreasing the rear track is it will bring the rear trailing arms closer to the main chassis rails by about 75 mil. So that'll put them in a much better location. You'll be able to just make a bracket there and anchor that trailing arm onto the chassis. Having successfully modified the rear suspension crossmember by cutting it and narrowing it, I'm now looking at the front crossmember. This goes from the back of the engine onto the subframe, underneath the engine to the front, and its job is to hold the front engine mount and the rear engine mount and the radiator. There's a move in Motorcars where you're going backwards and you throw the car 90 degrees, even 180 degrees, to go from reverse to forward, sometimes to pop it the nose of the car into a finish garage. And so how far out the nose of the car protrudes from the front wheel is a critical factor, because if your nose is too long on the car, when you swing it, it will tend to hit flags. So I'm looking at the length here and wondering whether I can also maybe modify the front crossmember. I saved the standard radiator, which is full width but very narrow, and it goes in front of the exhaust extractors, so you're getting a bit of heat from there coming into the back of the radiator. But really, it's twice the size of what it needs to be now that this Special will be about 1/4 of the weight of the car that this radiator was designed for. The issue with this radiator is because of its width, it has to go forward to get past everything. But what I'm looking at doing is reducing the size of the radiator by half. This is one out of a Honda Civic that I just happen to have lying around, and you can see it's 50 mil thick, so it's virtually got the same capacity as that standard Toyota radiator. But the big advantage is it can go in there, it can sit on the side, which means I don't need all this metal out here. I can cut it off here and cut off maybe 150 mil of that bracket. So with the radiator not sitting there, but back in there, tucked in the side of that crossmember, the bar that needs to go across the front to attach to this crossmember, instead of needing to go there, can go back there. like I say, that may not seem like a lot, but when the front of the car is swinging around, that much extra sticking out the front, well, every little bit helps to make an improvement. Now's the time to do it, so I'll cut this cross member so that I can mount the bar back here rather than up there. 50 years ago, yes, 50 years ago, when I built my first off-road buggy from a VW 1200cc Volkswagen Beetle, if I was attaching things to a car's subframe, I would have used 5mm flat steel plate, cut it to the pattern that was needed, drilled holes in it for the bolts, bolted it on, and then welded on whatever I needed to, like roll bars and things like that. But since then, I've discovered a much better way that's widely used in the racing industry, a much better way of attaching space frame chassis to manufactured car subframe. And it all begins with this. You take large flat washers and you weld them to pieces of tubing, like so. That becomes your mounting point for the bolt. The bolt then comes up from underneath and goes up through the washer, and you put the nut in the top. And then to this piece of steel tubing, you attach other bits of tubing that go to your chassis. When you're choosing the size of your tubing, you've got to make sure that it's big enough for the socket that fits the nut that you're going to use to fit in there. This wouldn't work with this particular socket because it won't go in, so you can't get onto the nut to lock it. So that's why with this big nut, I've had to go with a bigger piece of steel tube to make the mounting point so that the socket will go in. So that's the job I've got to do. I've got to weld up about half a dozen to 10 mounting plates like this, flat washers welded to steel tubing. I've got my 14 washers welded onto my short lengths of tube, and now I'm going to bolt them to the factory subframe and put lengths of tube between them where I need to make the mounts for my space frame chassis to join it to the factory subframes. These are the front and the rear engine mounts for the Corolla, and you can see how manufacturers put holes in them. What this is for is to allow the mount to move to reduce vibrations. You don't need this in racing. You're better off with that being solid rubber because obviously vibration is not an issue. So what I do is I fill in those gaps with Sikaflex, really tough industrial rubber. I'll fill in all those gaps, basically turn the mount into a solid mount. Solid rubber, that is. Here's the narrow rear suspension subframe of the Toyota. I've actually took 165mm out there, put a fish plate on the top and on the bottom, and couldn't have gone any further as it turned out because those washers are just about touching there on the end of those suspension arms. I've got my tubular mounts in position that I can take the stays for the roll cage off and the reinforcing to hold this frame in place. You can also see that the rear trailing arms are now within a reasonable distance of the main chassis rail, so I'll be able to tie those in quite easily.